Hey folks, welcome to Coffee and Revelation on Wednesday. Revelation chapter 19, verse 10. We're going through verse at a time because at this part, just because it's so wonderful. And I love it. At this, I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said to me, "Don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and with your brothers and sisters who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for it is the spirit of prophecy who bears testimony to Jesus." Worship God. You know, this whole idea of worship, what is that? I'm working with people just now, a lot of whom, Sydney Anglicans, don't like the concept or the idea of public worship. I love it. I think the church gathering together to publicly proclaim the glory of God is the reason we exist. Man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And yes, I know all the language. I know that we worship in our day-to-day activity. We worship in our work and so on. We have to worship God with our whole lives. But there's this particular act of worship. And here we see some dangers in it as well. John gets this wrong. There's this incredible scene with this incredible being, this angel. And John falls at his feet to worship him. And the angel gives him a round and says, don't do it. You know, we've been elevated from the dregs of a humanity in rebellion to being on a par with the angels, to being able to worship God with the angels. We've been called into the greatest praise and worship service ever. And that's why all the ideas of intermediaries or special religious ceremonies or good works that take us to God are just wrong. That's why the idea that we need to go through angels or even Mary is just wrong. We've been invited. We can't work our way up the ranks and get there. You can't. I noticed a church, I think it's Elevation Church, who I've written about before, in the US, who are charging $1,000 to go to one of their special services / concerts. If you want to sit at the very front and get a special pass, $1,000 to go to a worship service. This one's free. Well, it's not. It cost the blood of Christ. But this one is for all God's people. It's an invitation that applies to the prostitute as much as to the priest, to the poor person as much as to the Pope or the King. So it's right for John to revere the message, if you like, but it's wrong for him to worship the messenger. The servant, look what it says, the messenger is, "I am only a fellow servant." Now that doesn't mean that the speaker is a glorified believer. It means that he is an angel, but just as the angels proclaim from heaven, so believers proclaim from earth. So they're servants of God in proclaiming the testimony of Jesus. So I think this passage gives us a very clear warning how easy it is to fall into idolatry. And there's a judgment described in chapter 19 which comes into play for idolaters. Our object of worship is always to be God. It hasn't to be the building. It hasn't to be the pastor. It hasn't to be that particular spiritual leader. You know, I heard somebody say once that in terms of preaching, how people evaluate, if people come out and say, "That was a great preacher," or, you know, comment on the preacher's tie or something, or lack of it, not gone too well. If they come out and say that was a great sermon, maybe that's a bit better. But it's when they come out and say that's a great God, what a great God, then you know that's how it's worked. Because this is the testimony of Jesus. You know, it's so easy to fall into this trap, by the way, because in chapter 22, verses 8 and 9, we'll come on to that again, John does the same mistake. It's so easy for us to revere something or someone other than God. But true worship is spiritual, and true worship is of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we must not give worship to anybody else. So, the testimony of Jesus. Let's just say something about that. That's testimony about Jesus but it's also Jesus speaking through his people. So when we gather in worship, like in our home, you might have family worship, or when we gather in public worship with the Lord's people, we're testifying about Jesus, but Jesus is also testifying. That's fabulous, isn't it? Just absolutely fabulous. It's all about him. He is, what is it I've said? He is our magnificent obsession. God bless you and see you tomorrow. Bye.